my screen. All right. All right. So, welcome to this morning's presentation, which is the hidden performance edge, the gut-brain axis, and your athletic potential. About me, so I am a nutritional therapist with a deep passion for personalized nutrition, functional testing, metabolic health, mental health, with a special emphasis on low carb ketogenic diets. When I first started out as a nutritionist, I specialized a lot in gut and hormone health, and I still do quite a lot of functional testing. So in my practice, I do a lot of blood work, a lot of stool testing, a lot of hormone testing, which is the Dutch testing. And earlier this year, I moved into the space of mental health because I feel that there's a real need for addressing what is now going to be the leading cause of disability, which is going to be depression, anxiety. By 2030, they believe that 1 in 3 people will suffer from this. So I have been molding all my knowledge in functional medicine into the space of mental health, and I am fortunate enough to be working with the ketogenic diet and low carb diets. I am a mom to 2 boys, ages 15 and 11, and it's been this wonderful transition of seeing how my boys have gone from babies to toddlers to adolescent kids, and now to a teenage boy who is exercising, training more, wants to lift weights, wants to build muscle. And so now I get to use everything that I've learned into practice with him. And so I've been guiding him a lot on, that we eat for muscle health, we eat also for our gut microbiome. I'm also a proud FESAF certified personal trainer. So I did work as a personal trainer for a little while. But my curiosity really was around nutrition, and how food fuels athletic training. Um, Around me, I would see a lot of athletes just being burnt out all the time. And I think that really sort of sparked my interest in of going back to school and studying nutrition because I really wanted to understand the body better. I knew that it wasn't just, fuel your body and train. There was something deeper that I needed to learn. Fun fact about me, I lived in Asia for 19 years and moved to the US in 2022, and Austin, Texas is now home to me. So performance, recovery, and resilience. I really want to get this point across that performance isn't just about muscles. It is really about this full body framework of how do we support our training? How do we support our stress systems, which is the HPA axis, known as the hypothalamic pituitary axis? How do we get our sleep to support our training, our nutrition to support our training? How do we supplement with the right things? And the more I do research into this aspect of training, I've realized that men and women have very different training needs. We cannot, women, I love Dr. Stacy Sims saying that women are not small men. We have completely different needs. And I feel that this has really been ignored in the sport community where we're looking at the body in isolation. It isn't just about hitting your training harder and harder and harder. It's about how do we train smart? How do we fuel our bodies with the right nutrition that's feeding those gut bugs? And how do we keep our stress systems and recovery to an optimal level where we can do this over and over again? So I say your training should support overall gut health, your stress systems, and longevity. And I feel like this has been really ignored in the sport community. Now, I think we need to just get the obvious out of the way. The gut microbiome and sex differences. Women have very different gut microbiomes to a man, and the woman's microbiome will change 3 times in her life. It will change in puberty, it will change in pregnancy, and it will change postmenopause. And I call this the 3 Ps. And I think it's only now that this information is coming out there because women have really not been included in research studies. If you look at all the research on exercise physiology, intermittent fasting, time restricted eating, it's all based on men and it's all based on obese men. And so we cannot equate what we see with men to women. And so I think this is really important. So for all the athletes out there, you guys are, trainers, coaches, just remember that women's needs differ from men's needs. And so, what do athletes care about? Athletes care about ways of mitigating fatigue and pain, especially with endurance exercise, ways of improving endurance that supports your sport of choice, ways of improving energy production, ways of improving recovery and resilience, and ways of doing it again the next day without any inhibitions. So this is my favorite, quote. Stress through any kind of strenuous activity can activate your sympathetic nervous system pathways, which regulate water absorption by gut epithelial cell, mucin production from your goblet cells in the gut permeability, leaky gut, and inflammation. And when I look at the amount of stress that an athlete puts their body under, I always think about these things. How do we support athletic performance with all the mechanisms that we have? How do we support athletic performance through our gut microbiome, which we know is by far more important? We are more microbes than we are human cells. So the gut-brain axis, there's nobody on this call who has not heard of the gut-brain axis. We know that the gut talks to the brain talks to the gut. 95% of serotonin is made in the gut. The gut is where your B12 is made, your folate is made, your GABA is made, your melatonin is made. And people often are surprised at the fact that melatonin is also made in the gut. Because I myself used to think it's just the pineal gland. We wake up, we see sunlight, and as the day goes by, darkness triggers the production of melatonin, which is still true, but a lot of these neurotransmitters are made in the gut. So these neurotransmitters influence sleep, stress, and even performance. And I would take it one step further and say, what if your gut health was just as important as your training? So if there's any takeaway from today's presentation, it is that the microbiome supports mitochondrial health, neurotransmitter health, and hormone health. So the gut-brain axis is this bi-directional communication between the gut and the central nervous system that plays an important role in maintaining neural, hormonal, and immunological status. And so we know that we have these trillions of bacteria that live in the gut microbiome. We have this whole ecosystem of bugs in our intestines. And so I always think of this as like a city. These microbes are the people living in the city. We have policemen, which are antimicrobial peptides, which are constantly patrolling the area to see if everything is in homeostasis. 70% of our immune system is in the gut microbiome. So that is the part that makes my work so exciting because I know that everyone has a different blueprint. And when you think about things like autoimmunity and cancer, which is on the rise in the last couple of years, how do we mitigate that using microbiome testing? How do we mitigate all these negative effects of aging using stool testing? I do a lot of stool testing in my practice, so I get to see this. But we know we have we have more nerves that are going from the gut to the brain than we have going from the brain to the gut. So this is a real exciting part of wellness and sort of longevity and health that I'm really excited about. And we know that if we give someone a psychobiotic, which is a probiotic, we see benefits on their mental health just through this interaction with the gut microbiome. The simplest one is a lactobacillus, probiotic, which in studies have shown to reduce stress levels in individuals, to reduce things like irritable bowel syndrome, GI distress. So we can see that just by changing the microbes in the gut, we can change brain neurotransmitters. And I think, for people who exercise regularly, we already see that the gut microbiome is so malleable. There's so much metabolic activity happening in the gut microbiome of athletes and people who exercise regularly. So this is just, another sort of step on how do we acquire those microbes and, can we get them through exercise or can we get them through food? So this is what makes my job really exciting because I feel this is going to be a whole new aspect of wellness, which is going to be uncovered in the next couple of years. Some studies have suggested a link between VO2 max and intestinal microbiota. I mean, that in itself excites me. Cardiorespiratory fitness correlates with an increase in the diversity of the microbial community. And so we have this ecosystem, everything between the mouth and the anus is this ecosystem that is supporting every aspect of our health. And you guys as athletes, you guys as trainers and coaches are already one step ahead. We can see that exercise influences the growth of beneficial species in our gut, which help overall diversity and help keep pathogens away. So there is not a single system that isn't connected to the gut. We recognize this crosstalk between the gut lung, the gut bladder, the gut muscle, the gut liver, the gut brain, and the gut skin axis. So where did this all start? I really like to understand the history behind things. It all started with the Human Genome Project. This was an international effort to map all human genes and the entire sequence of DNA. It was launched in 1990 and completed in 2003, and it identified all human genes and their function and how it contributed to health and disease. But what this did bring about was the Human Microbiome Project. So the Human Microbiome Project started in 2007 and ended in 2016. And this project focused on the microbial genes and their role in human health. Microbial genes outnumber human genes by 150 to 1. So think about that. We are more bacteria than we are human. The human gut microbiota weighs about zero point 0.2 kilograms of human body weight. So we are not just human, we are an ecosystem. So we have this amazing living, breathing, nurturing, digesting um, ecosystem in our guts. And so your gut is your human performance center. So in research, the gut microbiome of an athlete provides neurotransmitters, which are dopamine, adrenaline, noradrenaline, GABA, acetylcholine, short chain fatty acids, which are these chemical compounds released from the breakdown of fiber. And I'm going to talk about these short chain fatty acids in detail because of all of the three short chain fatty acids, butyrate, which is really well studied, is what is found in people who exercise a lot. And endocrine molecules supporting the brain modulation of neural networks. So, if we know that the gut produces neurotransmitters, how do we drive this in our favor? Our microbial population spans the entire body except for the brain and the circulatory system and is mostly concentrated in the skin, nose, oral cavity, the gastrointestinal tract, and the urogenital tract. So this includes bacteria, fungi, viruses, yeast, and protozoa. And when we think about bacteria, fungi, viruses, it sort of has this negative connotation to it, but actually we need them. They are the ones that are digesting our food, creating these vitamins. And in fact, because of the fact that antibiotics have been so badly abused, we've lost a lot of these microbes and we have evolved with these microbes. Bacterial DNA outnumber our human genome. We live in symbiosis with our gut microbiome. So mitochondria, which is the energy producing organelle in the cell, is a bacteria. A lot of people don't know that, but mitochondria have its own DNA. And so we have always lived in symbiosis with bacteria. And I feel that all these modern medications that are produced now are killing the bacteria in our gut, killing the bacteria in our body, and we need them. So our gut microbiome harbors 70% of our immune system. And so I think to understand the gut microbiome, it is important to understand the digestive tract. And so a lot of these microbes are in the large colon, which is the red part here. But we also have bacteria that live in the mouth. We have bacteria that live in the stomach. The stomach has the lowest amount of bacteria because of the acidic pH of the stomach, which is good because it needs to break down pathogens, it needs to break down proteins. We have lactobacillus, candida, strep, and H. pylori, and anyone who's dealt with ulcers will know about H. pylori. And so these are called aerobic, and as we move down the digestive tract, we have anaerobic bacteria. So the colon has a favorable pH where you'll find more of the beneficial commensal bacteria, which is Bacteroides, Clostridium, Bifidobacteria, and Enterobacteriaceae. And bacteria in the large intestine mainly rely on dietary substrates that haven't been digested in the upper GI tract. So, microbiome at birth, a baby's first colonization of the gut microbiome starts with E. coli and then starts to grow levels of lactobacillus and bifidobacteria. And we know that this is more prevalent in babies who are born vaginally. Breast milk is the first prebiotic for the gut microbiome. So, breast milk has about 200 different HMOs, which are human milk oligosaccharides, which actually feed this bifidobacteria. So, the longer you can breastfeed your child, they say that the better their gut microbiomes is. And as a person ages, we see the reduction of bifidobacteria, which does provide quite a fair bit of immune tolerance, but lactobacillus seems to stay the same. So microbiome into adolescence in adulthood, as a baby matures, their microbiome matures and weaning creates a whole new set of microbes. Lactobacillus species stay constant through life, but levels of bifidobacteria change. And then nutritional needs change for kids. Kids need more B vitamins, more iron, more zinc, more protein, fermented foods. And I'm constantly harping on about this that, kids need to stay away from things that are inflammatory like sugar, gluten, and there's a space for dairy as well in that. So this is, our gut's first line of immune defense, which is called secretory IgA. And in basic layman terms, it is the mucosal lining of the gut that actually keeps your bacteria. So the secretory IgA is your gut's mucosal membrane, which is your body's first line of defense against pathogens and bacteria. And this is where the antimicrobial peptides, where the policemen of the gut microbiome are constantly sampling all the microbes in the gut because every 72 hours your gut cells are constantly regenerating. So it's really important to have a robust gut lining and exercise. Funnily enough, increases secretory IgA, which is amazing. And so these mucosal membranes are what strengthen the gastrointestinal barrier. So as you can imagine, as people get older and older in life, this mucosal lining gets thinner and thinner and thinner. And it really is this mucosal lining that actually keeps these toll-like receptors, which are your immune cells, in homeostasis. So think about, you've got these policemen that are constantly controlling your microbiome to see if everything's okay. And if they detect pathogens, the role of the immune system is to kill those pathogens. If those pathogens do not get killed, then you sort of start this low level chronic inflammation in your gut, and the gut starts producing antibodies towards your own intestinal microbiota. And that's where you see lots of gut related issues. So, when I mentioned earlier that the colon actually contains lots of the microbes that feed off undigested food, this is known as saccharolytic bacterial fermentation. This is the bacterial fermentation of dietary fiber resulting in short chain fatty acids. And I mentioned there's three, acetate, propionate, and butyrate. And out of those three short chain fatty acids, butyrate is the superstar by all means. It's the main source of fuel for your colonocytes, which are your gut cells. Butyrate has potential anti-cancer effects. Butyrate has the ability to change gene expression. It also activates gluconeogenesis, which is beneficial effects of glucose on energy homeostasis. Butyrate is actually really well studied in the model of traumatic brain injury, where they've given a mouse butyrate post the traumatic injury, and they've actually seen less tissue damage in the brain. So butyrate is actually a supplement that I give my clients when I know that they exercise quite a fair bit, just to keep the gut cells happy, fueled, making sure there's no leaky gut. I can go on and on about butyrate, but it increases the expression of tight junctions, which are basically these proteins that hold our gut cells together. It inhibits inflammation. It reduces mucosal permeability, so leaky gut. Butyrate also controls the pro-inflammatory cytokines like NF-kappa B, reduces oxidative stress, and plays a huge role in visceral hypersensitivity. And so when I look at, athletes who actually do have visceral hypersensitivity, which is pain in the stomach post-exercise, butyrate is a supplement that I'm happy to give them because I know the benefits. However, we still have acetate and propionate, which is also a short chain fatty acids, which is produced from the breakdown of fiber. This is produced by bifidobacteria, Akkermansia, muciniphila, which has gotten a lot of press in the last 2 years for its ability to release GLP-1, Prevotella, and Streptococcus. Acetate enters the bloodstream and is actually used by the muscle for fuel. It also has lipogenesis precursor, so it acts as a substrate for cholesterol and fatty acid synthesis in the liver. Um, it can cross the blood-brain barrier and activate GLP-1, so influencing satiety, and it can also influence immune regulation. So all short-chain fatty acids will have an effect on the immune system just through the action of being in the gut. And acetate will strengthen the epithelial barrier integrity and support anti-inflammatory pathways. Then you have propionate, which is another very interesting short chain fatty acids, which can actually be used by some of the gut microbes to actually produce energy. Veillonella, which I'm going to talk about later, is actually a gut microbe that uses lactic acid from your muscles and will convert that into propionate. So it's produced by Veillonella, Bacteroides, Prevotella, Propionobacterium. It is taken up by the liver where it serves as gluconeogenic substrate, so helps generate glucose from non-carbohydrate sources and regulates lipid metabolism. In studies, propionate has actually shown to reduce cholesterol levels. So, when we think of exercise really changing metabolic markers, because I'm always doing blood testing. I'm always checking metabolic markers, not just cholesterol, but I'm checking things like hemoglobin A1C, your fasting insulin. There's many ways that exercise is boosting our metabolic health. Propionate has also shown to modulate blood pressure. So research shows that propionate modulates sympathetic nervous system activity and lowers blood pressure in animal models. And again, just through the influence of the T regulatory cells, which are immune cells, propionate can also affect immune modulation. So I do a lot of stool testing, and I thought I'll put an example. So when I'm looking at stool testing, I'm basically looking at things like commensal keystone bacteria, which is the bacteria that is measured that everyone harbors in their gut. So, they've done research on a lot of bacteria, but this seems to be the most well-researched bacteria. So I'm looking at things like Bacteroides, Bifidobacteria. 90% of the phyla in the gut microbiome is Bacteroides to Firmicutes. And so we know that if someone has good levels of these two bacteria, their microbiome is doing well. But I'm looking at things like Akkermansia because Akkermansia is a mucin-loving bacteria. It will actually eat up old mucin and then create new ones. People who have good levels of Akkermansia have good levels of GLP-1. They're more metabolically healthy. So I'm always looking at things like Akkermansia. Faecalibacterium is a butyrate producing bacteria. So I'm looking at this stuff when I'm checking out stool testing. I'm looking at things like Roseburia. And so, this is an example of what I see. Now, does everyone have all these microbes? No, this person cannot grow any Escherichia in their gut microbiome because perhaps they've been on lots of antibiotics. But these are things I'm constantly looking at. I think, if we think about we're more microbial than we are human DNA, I think it's really important. I'm always wondering why more stool testing isn't done in practice because we're looking at blood work. But I think just as much as we look at blood work, we need to be looking at stool testing as well. So this is what I see. So this was, you just saw the first page. This is the last page of the stool testing. I can clearly see someone's secretory IgA being low or high. Now, a low secretory IgA tells me this person doesn't have good mucosal membranes. This person will not have good stress tolerance. This person has a leaky gut, probably will have food allergies. and probably will have a hard time exercising. I'm also looking at things like how much digestive enzymes do they have? Are they digesting their proteins? Because you can be eating as much protein as you want, but you're not digesting any of it if you don't have good levels of elastase. Beta glucuronidase is another enzyme in the gut which actually cleaves off old hormones and recirculates them. So I'm looking at beta glucuronidase in detail. I'm also looking at, is there blood in the stools? Is there occult blood? Um, how much antibodies are they producing towards gluten? Calprotectin, which is a marker of inflammation in the large colon, gives me an idea of how much fiber this person is eating. Does this person need to be referred out? What are other levels? What are other ways that I can bring their levels of calprotectin down? Do they need to be on an anti-inflammatory diet for a little while? And so, the takeaway is that the gut microbiome is still being uncovered. And I will say, I have seen a lot of stool testing. Nobody can say that I have the best gut microbiome. I would love to say it's me, but it's not. I work hard every day on my gut microbiome. So everybody has a different blueprint, and there is still no good distinction of what a healthy microbiome looks like. But I think that's going to change in the next 10 years. I actually think that we're going to be seeing more fecal implants being done. Um, and we already see this, and a lot of this work is actually being done in Australia. I think fecal implants are quite popular in Australia. And your gut microbiome will depend on your mode of delivery. So, early life exposure. Did you go through any traumatic events as a young child? Because that shapes your gut microbiome. Separation from the parents, your immune status as a child, um, your environment, and most importantly, your food intake. We can see that individuals, so especially in my studies where they are germ-free, which means that they're devoid of the microbiome, they have a more exaggerated response to stress. And we see this, in individuals suffering from irritable bowel syndrome, ulcerative colitis, and Crohn's disease. We see more of the mental health issues. And lifestyle and behaviors is just as important as a kid as it is when you're older. So I'm always optimizing for sleep. I'm always thinking about sunlight and circadian rhythms because humans were designed to work on a circadian rhythm. We also know that our guts work on a circadian rhythm. We have circadian rhythms in all of our organs. So sleep is really, really your biggest tool when it comes to recovery. Your activity levels and your levels of minerals play an important role as well. And so your gut microbiome, it supports digestion and nutrient absorption. And so this is where I talk about the neurotransmitters is that your gut microbiome actually is what makes these B vitamins. It also supports vitamin K. But B vitamins are what make dopamine and adrenaline. So B6, B9, B12 are really important for neurotransmitters. Folate and biotin are immunomodulatory, and B6 is essential for dopamine and noradrenaline. Defense against pathogens, so fungi, parasite, protozoa, lipopolysaccharide, which is the outer coating of a gram-negative bacteria. It actually keeps all these things at bay, so we don't have endotoxemia, which is the infiltration of these LPS-producing bacteria in the blood. And it does this through the action of the secretory IgA and the antimicrobial peptides. It detoxifies toxins, bacterial pathogens through the microbiome and regulates your immune function through toll-like receptors. Produces key neurotransmitters such as serotonin, GABA, melatonin, acetylcholine. And if you're a woman who has, crossed menopause, acetylcholine and estrogen are so strongly linked. If you're going through menopause or you're postmenopausal, you should be on a supplement of acetylcholine because acetylcholine is so important for learning and memory and aids in stress management. So we have this whole ecosystem that is actually doing more for our bodies than our own blood cells, our own DNA. So I think it's really important to understand that we need to take care of our gut microbiomes, whether that's through the action of eating more fiber, taking probiotics, taking our B vitamins, eating more greens, getting more diversity. It's really important to take care of your gut microbiome. And it's these short chain fatty acids that mediate the gut-brain axis and produce peptide YY and GLP-1. And if you've heard of the new GLP-1s like Ozempic and semaglutide, you know that your body can actually produce this enzyme protein by yourself. It's when a person has reached a state of dysfunction that their guts have stopped producing GLP-1s. So we need the dopamine. We need the adrenaline. You need the dopamine for the motivation, motor control. You need the noradrenaline for the reaction time and attention. You need serotonin for your mood, sleep, and gut motility. And we need the GABA for calm focus and recovery. And if you look at all the foods that are present, it's basically the animal proteins that you need for all this stuff. You also need fermented foods to fuel the lactobacillus. Um, I mean, I think, the takeaway from this is that our gut is a neurotransmitter factory. So we should be feeding our guts just as much as we're feeding the brain. And I think there's nothing that can replace this notion of, yes, we need to train. We need to push ourselves to these limits where our bodies and our guts can actually evolve together. But it is really important to make sure that our gut is happy as well. So this was a study which talked about the gut producing neurotransmitters. It's worth a read. It's called a narrative hypothesis, the important role of gut microbiome in the modulation of effort tolerance. So, this constant circle that athletes are in to where let's push ourselves, but then also let's support our gut health, and then let's push ourselves again, so that we get all these adaptations. And this is, a clear representation of if you fuel the gut microbiome with the right foods, these short chain fatty acids go up, intestinal peristalsis goes up, the secretory IgA goes up, myokines are released, you get the weight loss. But also how the gut influences muscle health through bile acids, through LPS producing bacteria, which can actually have an anti-inflammatory effect or an inflammatory effect. If your gut is not healthy, you have more of the LPS producing bacteria, you actually end up with more sarcopenia. So this is where the gut muscle axis is really relevant. And then you have this stress inducing stimulus, which is exercise, which then feeds the brain production of BDNF, GABA, serotonin. So, it's a triangle. You're constantly working with these three organs in supporting your health. And this becomes even more pronounced as you get older. So, prolonged exercise over 90 minutes has shown to have a transient decrease in blood flow to the GI tract, which is also a result of just the activation of the autonomic nervous system, which is the sympathetic nervous system. And this can result in bacterial translocation from the colon, which is, you increase the risk of gastrointestinal issues. Endurance exercise, 9 out of 15 runners experience nausea, abdominal cramps, diarrhea, and vomiting. And in studies, we have done research to where we've measured the microbes post a race, and we see a 70% decrease in bifidobacteria after a race. So this is where I think it's important for, athletes and coaches and exercise enthusiasts to understand, how do you fuel your gut so that you're able to replenish the gut microbes? Is that, do we do broad spectrum probiotics before and after? What kind of dietary polyphenols, are we looking at things like curcumin or ginger? Glutamine is very famous for a lot of athletes like to take glutamine post exercise, and I actually think there is some benefit to that. Do we take slippery elm? Do we take aloe vera? Does a person take digestive enzymes on a regular basis? What does rest and recovery look like for them? Do we supplement with micronutrients? Do we supplement with things like creatine monohydrate? I mean, these are all questions I think everyone should be asking themselves. So, how does your gut microbiome support mitochondrial health? So, again, these short chain fatty acids actually can go into the mitochondria and produce energy during exercise. These short chain fatty acids also support mitochondrial biogenesis, helping to grow new mitochondria. Exercise can enhance insulin sensitivity, as you guys know. It improves overall gut microbiome diversity. So athletes do have a set of specific bacteria that it actually has been replicated in mice. If they put that same bacteria in a mice and make them run on a treadmill, they will actually run faster and for longer. And helps in the motility of bacteria. So remember, it isn't just the gut microbiome. It is also the fact that we need to support the motility. So these bacteria are being released and secreted out of the body through stool every single day. And so we need that. We want that. The key species found in athletic individuals are things like Akkermansia. I am a huge fan of, foods that are red in color because things that are red in color actually feed Akkermansia. So Akkermansia helps maintain your gut's mucosal layer, which then prevents harmful substances from entering circulation. And a robust gut reduces the risk of leaky gut syndrome, which is then linked to systemic inflammation, autoimmune conditions, metabolic disorders, and obesity. And I clearly see this in individuals who are lacking Akkermansia. They are very metabolically unhealthy. Their metabolic markers on blood also look unhealthy. So it is interesting to be able to correlate that with stool testing in blood. And higher levels are linked with better insulin sensitivity, especially with research being linked with GLP-1s. Veillonella, so this is a very interesting microbe. So this is the one that I talked about where they actually prepared a probiotic of Veillonella, took it from athletes, gave it to mice, and mice were able to run faster. So I think if we could all bottle up Veillonella in a pill, that'd be amazing. But this is a bacteria that thrives on lactate, which is a byproduct of exercise, and converts it to a short chain fatty acid known as propionate. And then propionate is then used in the mitochondria. So it is actually a microbe that can use lactate and propionate. It helps modulate liver metabolism, reducing lipid accumulation and fat accumulation. And the conversion of lactate to short chain fatty acids allows for efficient recycling of energy. So when I talk about athletes and people who exercise a lot having this really metabolically active gut microbiome, this is what I'm talking about, that they are able to use different substrates for fuel. And propionate has shown to improve cholesterol levels and regulate blood pressure. Prevotella is another one, and this is a very interesting microbe because it's actually not found in everyone. It comes from individuals from Asia and rural Africa and specializes in breaking down complex carbohydrates and plant fibers. So this is where I feel bioindividuality really comes in. And this is again where I will say that we don't know everything about the gut microbiome. This is still being uncovered. So different individuals from different areas of the world will have different levels of bacteria. Um, I did some stool testing on a family that was in Denmark, and their microbes were completely different from what I see here in the US. So this bacteria is accompanied by higher levels of branched chain amino acid metabolism. It is linked to improved glucose tolerance and insulin sensitivity, likely because of the short chain fatty acid production. It's anti-inflammatory and also is, involved in the metabolism of vitamin B6, which again is a precursor for dopamine, adrenaline, and noradrenaline. So what happens when our gut microbiome gets disrupted? So there's a term called dysbiosis, and this basically means that there has been a disruption in the quality and quantity of the microbial composition, which is linked to several diseases. So what are the implications of dysbiosis for someone who exercises? It causes inflammation. It can cause changes in anabolic mediators and muscle protein synthesis, leading to skeletal muscle physiology. But in the most basic of terms, it is the stomach aches, it is the IBS, it is the loose stools, it is the heartburns. We can have all of this linked to dysbiosis. And dysbiosis is a very well studied term in nutrition as to who are the ones that suffer most from the dysbiosis. Is it the people with celiac disease? Is it the athletes? And how do we mitigate aspects of dysbiosis? So the implications of dysbiosis, it can disrupt the absorption of vitamins. It can have pro-anabolic effects on skeletal muscles, including the amino acid synthesis and oxidative stress. So this is what we want to keep down when we're exercising, is we want to keep our body's oxidative stress low. Bile acids, which is bile is produced through in the gallbladder and it is secreted through digestion. That can also play a role in implication of dysbiosis. Bile acid is actually our body's nature's own antibiotic for antimicrobial for the gut. So it's really important for when we're digesting our food, when we're eating our food, for our bodies to release these bile acids. Um, and lastly, short chain fatty acid production influences muscle protein accumulation by regulating anabolic catabolic action. So it is really important to make sure that we don't tip over to this edge of dysbiosis, which is very easy to do when you exercise a lot. And then dysbiosis results from five different factors. So poor diet, lacking in soluble fiber, or you're eating a diet high in packaged and refined foods. This it greatly impacts levels of bifidobacteria and lactobacillus. I live in the US where we call the standard American diet the SAD diet. And so, this is where 95% of the population in the US is eating packaged foods, processed foods. And so we know that the effect on the gut microbiome is intense. A diet rich in animal fat but low in fiber. Now, I have nothing wrong with animal fat. Protein is really important, but we want to make sure that we pair that with fiber. Excess fermentation of carbohydrates when people are eating too many carbohydrates. Sensitization, which results from an immune response to the components of the intestinal microbiota, exemplified by a decrease in secretory IgA. So this is the stool test I showed you, which is a person who is eating out all the time, not taking a look at how much processed food is in their diet. So this is again, your immune system is constantly vigilant. And I will say that your immune system is an energy hogging system. So if you want to have more energy, you really need to make sure that your immune system is healthy. And fungal dysbiosis, which results in a diet rich in simple sugars, refined carbohydrates, and low in fiber, which results in the growth of things like candida and yeast. So, dietary and lifestyle strategies to improve athletic performance. You need to make sure that you are structured around your athletic needs in terms of training. You need to look at your diet. You need to look at your physiology. When are you training? What is the right amount of training given, male, female, fiber intake, and probiotics? Looking at things like, am I going to be taking probiotics for the next 3 months after a triathlon or an ultra marathon? And I think, last but not least, making sure that you're doing stool samples to take a look at the changes that is happening in your gut. Because I think, when it comes to longevity, we know that there is nothing that is more powerful than exercise. I was listening to a podcast yesterday where they were talking about as you get older, your training needs to be adapted to that. If you get hurt, you're out. And so I think this is really ways of mitigating any kind of negative effects that are linked with exercise, really making sure that inflammation, which is the key root cause of all disease, stays low. So diet and nutrition. I will, as I mean, this is what I'm trained in first and foremost, but I will say that everybody's diet and nutrition is so different because it really depends. I think that nutrition has become one of the most complex things in today's world because we are basing our food on our likes and dislikes rather than what we need to eat. We're also very much influenced by social media on what to eat. And so I will just keep this very simple. That protein, making sure that you're getting those essential amino acids because that is something that we need from our diet is going to be really important. So I always talk about quality of protein, making sure you have protein at all three meals, and your snack is going to be like the basics of what you're going to be eating. fiber-rich food. So remember that it is the fiber-rich foods that are feeding the gut microbiome. Now, I will caveat this by saying not everybody can tolerate fiber, especially if you've had a compromised gut for a while or if you've been on mega doses of antibiotics in your life. So my key takeaway from for people is that start with the foods that you can actually tolerate. Start with the fiber-rich foods that you can actually digest in your gut microbiome. Nobody wants to be dealing with flatulence. Nobody wants to be dealing with uncomfortable sensations. Start with the fibrous-rich foods that you can tolerate and then start adding in more. In the research, it says that ensuring a fiber intake of 14.6 grams for a 1,000 kilocalorie diet is where you should start. So it's the fiber that produces the short chain fatty acids. This is one of my personal favorites. So fermented foods, so things like kefir, sauerkraut, kimchi, miso. But there are human dietary studies that have shown an improved glucose metabolism and a decrease in muscle soreness when supplemented with fermented foods. So I've just always had a habit of having yogurt post a workout. So I was really happy to see this research. Last but not least, polyphenols, which are these dark colored pigments, which are antioxidants for the body, but also are prebiotic foods for the gut microbiome. They feed the lactobacillus, they feed the bifidobacteria. So fuel up on polyphenols. So things like blueberries, raspberries, pomegranate seeds are my favorite. Adding in color, diversity, making sure your plate looks like a rainbow. And then recovery and inflammation. These short chain fatty acids are really what will help you with your recovery and inflammation. So butyrate, acetate, propionate help by reducing systemic inflammation and modulating the immune cells. Your short chain fatty acids produced by the gut bacteria help reduce muscle inflammation post-exercise and support recovery by improving nutrient absorption. So I think this is where, as trainers, as coaches, we need to be very mindful of making sure that our athletes, the people who we're working with, get adequate amounts of recovery and are fueling their gut microbes and they're fueling their bodies for recovery. Lactobacillus and bifidobacteria, these are the first microbes you're colonized with. These are the microbes you want to keep healthy through life. They produce metabolites that reduce inflammatory cytokines. Lactobacillus is a bacteria that actually produces lactic acid, which actually helps kill off other pathogens. So we want to keep this. And Akkermansia muciniphila, which helps maintain gut lining integrity, reducing inflammation and aiding in recovery. And I will stop sharing and take questions.
Mm. Does anybody have any questions for
Are there
Pooja?
any questions in the chat?
Nope. A lot to digest there. Definitely, Pooja. Right.
I will
Very
Yeah,
stop.
complex.
yeah.
I will
Thank
stop
you.
recording, right?
Yes, you can stop
Okay.
recording. Yeah.
Yeah.